Hi everyone, last night I was thinking about books and what gets popular, and I started thinking about how with some authors there will be a certain book or series that gets really popular, and I thought it might be kind of a fun video to take a look at some examples that I could think of some lesser known books or series by authors that have something else that's really popular on Booktube. This is just the list that I was able to think of off the top of my head, so please let me know down in the comments if you can think of other examples of this, or if you have favorite books that are lesser known works by really popular authors. Doesn't even have to be on Booktube, but here's going to be my list. Some of these are going to be books that I've read personally, and also a decent number of them are books that I haven't read, but maybe I'll check them out someday, or maybe I won't. Maybe you will. We'll find out. The author that probably inspired this idea the most was Naomi Novik, because she has a couple of books that have been very acclaimed and very popular on Booktube the last few years, and then she has other books that I haven't heard anyone talk about. So her most popular books are probably Spinning Silver and Uprooted, which are both fairy tale retellings. I actually haven't read either one of these, but I know a lot of people really like them. I think I actually tried Spinning Silver a few years ago and couldn't get into it, but I'd consider giving it a try again. It was interesting. I just wasn't super engaged by it at the time, and it might have just been my state of mind when I picked it up. The reason I was thinking about Naomi Novik is I just got my husband started on reading her Temeraire series, which was her first series, and it's a really long-running series. She was publishing it from 2006 to 2017, so I think at least one of her fairy tale books might have come out before she even finished the Temeraire series. I remember picking this series up when it came out in 2006. I was still in high school, and it was kind of exciting because the publisher tried this new thing where they published all three of the first books. I can't remember if it was at once or they came out like one after another over a few months. But either way, the first three books in the series were pretty much available immediately, and that was kind of an interesting new publishing model. I don't think it has really caught on. I can't think of too many examples of other books that have done things like that, except I do know that with Ruin of Kings, I think they're publishing all the installments like 6 months apart or something, so that's also an attempt at kind of a different publishing model. Anyway, I really enjoy the Temeraire series. I didn't quite make it through all 10. I don't know, I sort of lost track somewhere in the middle, kind of lost interest in it. It did get kind of repetitive, but the first few are really, really enjoyable. It's a really fun series. If you guys don't know anything about it, it's basically the Napoleonic Wars, but with dragons, and it focuses around Captain Will Lawrence and his dragon Temeraire, and that's really the central relationship of the series. They go all over the world having adventures and get to see dragons in different cultures, in China, in Japan. I don't think I read the one with Japan. In Africa, Australia, South America. So it's a series that covers a lot of different settings. It's very historical, and I think it's a lot of fun. But I honestly can't remember ever hearing anyone talk about it on Booktube, and that might just be because it's an older series. The first books came out in 2006, which wasn't incredibly long ago, but I definitely think people are more interested in recent books. Another author that came to mind for me right away with this idea was Mark Lawrence. His most popular books that I know about are the Red Sister trilogy, which I think is about assassin nuns. I haven't read it. It is one I actually kind of think sounds like fun, and I would be interested in trying it at some point. I think he also has a new series that he started publishing that might be in the same world, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but I've seen people talking about the books in that series as well. So I haven't read any of those books. I did try his first book, which I don't hear anyone talk about. Like maybe I've heard it mentioned once or twice, and that's the Broken Empire series. The first book, The Prince of Thorns, came out in 2011, which again, it was a while ago, which maybe is why people aren't as into this series. But another reason the series might not be as popular is I think it's a much darker series, at least from what I understand, not having really read either. I did DNF The Prince of Thorns, which was the first book. Apparently the protagonist of the Broken Empire series is extremely dark and unlikable and just does a lot of bad things, and some people found that interesting, and some people just found it a little bit too horrible to read about. It definitely sounds like the kind of thing that I'm not super interested in reading, but I'm not sure if that's the reason, or it's just his later series just became more successful, and that's why people talk about it more. Honestly, I'd rather see an author's more recent books be more popular, because that means they're building their audience, right? So not necessarily a bad thing. I just thought it was interesting. An author that you guys have probably heard me mention a lot recently is Seanan McGuire, because I've been reading her Encrypted series. So that's another one that I thought of when I was thinking about lesser known books by popular authors. I think Middle Game was very popular on Booktube last year, and I've also people mention her Wayward Children series, but I think I've only heard one other person on YouTube mention the Encrypted series ever. And I think it's a really hilarious, fun series with a great cast of characters. Just, not the most deep series ever, but just really good fun. And Middle Game, on the other hand, is a book that, I liked it, but it was a book that really took itself too seriously, in my opinion. I think probably Seanan McGuire's most popular series, from what I know about her, is actually her October Day series, which I haven't tried. I know that was her first series, so the first book in the series was her first ever published book, and I've heard it's not that great. Overall, I do like her writing, so I'm not sure. I might be willing to charge through the first couple books in that series just to see if I can get into it or not, but I need to finish the Encrypted series first. So I think it's interesting that people on YouTube have really picked up certain of her series, but definitely not all of them. Given that Middle Game did seem pretty popular and talked about, I'm wondering if people will go back to any of her backlist or if they will just wait for a sequel to Middle Game. One of my favorite non-fantasy authors is Kazuo Ishiguro, who has written stuff that strays into the speculative, but has also written all kinds of literary fiction. He's an author I really got into in my teens, when I had a couple of years in my mid-teens where I really wasn't reading very much fantasy at all before I got back into the genre. During that time, I read a lot of literary fiction, some of which I liked and some of which not so much. So the book of his that I see people picking up the most is Never Let Me Go, which is kind of science fiction, but honestly, I don't really like that book so much. It's not just because that book isn't really science fiction, and I think people that go into it looking for real science fiction are going to be pretty disappointed. That book just didn't resonate with me as much as some of his earlier books. I've been meaning to read his most recent book, The Buried Giant, which I think also has some genre elements. I've been meaning to read that book for a few years. I just haven't gotten around to it, and it's short. So I think the reason that Never Let Me Go is his most popular book on Booktube is probably because it's more recent, it's more genre, and there was a movie of it a few years ago, so I think it's probably just more in the public consciousness in general. Before Never Let Me Go, probably his most famous book was The Remains of the Day, which was published in 1989 and won a Booker Prize. There was also a movie made from it in 1993, which I haven't seen, but it's starring Emma Thompson and Anthony Hopkins. So I think that movie was pretty successful back in the early 90s. Remains of the Day is about an English butler who worked for a lord during World War II who was kind of a Nazi sympathizer, and it's really an unreliable narrator story where this character is looking at his past actions and kind of seeking to justify his own silence and complicity when he was just doing his job. It's a really interesting book. Definitely very quiet, character-driven. I wouldn't say that it has a ton of plot, but I really like that book, and what I like even more is a book on quite similar themes that he wrote in 1986 called An Artist of the Floating World. I've been recommending this book to people for years. It's probably my favorite thing by him. It's also a book with an extremely unreliable narrator. This time it's set in post-World War II Japan with an artist main character who worked as a propagandist during World War II and is also sort of dealing in his own way with the repercussions of what he did. Both An Artist of the Floating World and The Remains of the Day are very quiet, pretty literary, character-driven books. I haven't seen anyone talk about these books on Booktube, but I also mostly watch people that read science fiction and fantasy, and also these books are both older than me, so I don't really blame anyone for not picking them up, but I feel like people, if you liked Never Let Me Go, or even if you didn't, but you're curious to see what some of his older books are like, I would highly recommend reading one of those two. This next one on the list is really just for fun. I was curious about what George R.R. Martin has written other than A Song of Ice and Fire. I know he's done a lot of writing for TV. I know he's done short stories. I know he has this Wild Card series that he has collaborated on and edits, but I was curious if he'd published any other novels because I just didn't even know the names of any, and so I looked it up. And here's the list for you guys. He has written 5 novels, and I'll just tell you the 3 that are not co-authored. He wrote a book called Dying of the Light, which came out in 1977. He wrote a book called Fever Dream, which is from 1982, and The Armageddon Rag was published in 1983. So those are 3 books by George R.R. Martin that I know absolutely nothing about. I have the feeling that all 3, they sound like they could be science fiction. I don't know. I think somebody should go read them. I don't know if I'm going to. I'm kind of interested. Maybe I should. There's my challenge to everyone. In fact, I think that's going to be my challenge to you all from this video. Find a well-known author that you like or are curious about, and go and find the oldest, most obscure book by them that you can and read that. And then do a review about it for us. Since this is a list video, I absolutely have to talk about Brandon Sanderson, right? It's a requirement. I think it's a Booktube requirement. It's definitely a personal requirement. I've read pretty much everything by Brandon Sanderson. I'm sure there's something out there that I haven't read, but overall, I've been pretty completionist about it. There are a few of his books that don't get mentioned very much. They probably still get mentioned more than a lot of other things because it's still Brandon Sanderson and he's very popular right now. First off is his Alcatraz series, which is a middle grade series. I think there's still one left to be written, but I'm not sure. I read the first one of these. Honestly, I thought it was pretty fun. I don't read a lot of middle grade, but I'll try anything by Brandon Sanderson. I would read more, I just haven't actively sought that out. He himself has said that this series didn't really work because it's middle grade, but the humor is pitched a little bit above the level of the average middle grade reader. But on the other hand, the age of the character is too young to really appeal to a YA reader, so this series hasn't been super successful for him. It definitely, from what I saw in the one book, has either the worst or the best parts of Brandon Sanderson's humor, depending on how you feel about his humor. Alcatraz is an unreliable narrator who actively messes with the reader during the course of the story and really breaks the fourth wall, breaks conventions of storytelling, and just a lot of stuff like that. So, I thought it was cute and funny, but it hasn't been super successful, and I can kind of understand why. The other book of his that doesn't come up too often is The Rhythmatist, which was published, I think, in 2013. This one, there was supposed to be a sequel to that he hasn't written yet, and I think the main reason for this is because, from what he's said, he feels like he needs to do a lot of research into Native American and Indigenous cultures to really tell the second story, but while he's working on all these Cosmere books, the other smaller or YA books that he's doing are really intended to be breaks and not research intensive books, so he just hasn't had time in his schedule to write the sequel to The Rhythmatist yet. I really liked The Rhythmatist. I can't remember if it's really classified more middle grade or YA. I think it's kind of like an early YA feel. It has a magic system that feels a little bit more like it could be a Cosmere magic system. It's this chalk-based magic system where characters write these chalk drawings and they come to life, basically. I thought it was cute, it was fun, it was creative. I've definitely seen people pick it up, but it's just not one that people go to as much. I personally enjoyed The Rhythmatist more than I enjoyed the Steelheart series, but I don't know how other people feel about that. The next author I'll mention is James S.A. Corey, who is actually two people. Daniel Abraham, who has other fantasy books, and then Ty Frank, who was George R.R. Martin's personal assistant. So together they write the Expanse series as James S.A. Corey. So this is a little unfair, but I'm going to mention Daniel Abraham's fantasy series, The Long Price Quartet, because this is one I'm super interested in picking up. Alan from the Library of Alexandria has been talking about this one a lot recently. He's been reading it, and I've just been really excited to try it. I'm just reading so much else right now. I have a copy. It's waiting for me. I'll get to it eventually. But I think this is a series also. I've heard really great things about it. I don't know too much about it, but I don't see too many people picking this up. I also saw when I was researching for this video that Daniel Abraham has a series called the Dagger and Coin series, which I think is a really cool title. I know literally nothing about that. I didn't look any further than that. I'm curious if anyone has ever, of course somebody has read it or they wouldn't have published all the books in the series, but I haven't heard anyone mention it, so I'm curious if any of you have ever tried it. The final author that I'll mention is N.K Jemisin. Of course, I saw a ton of people last year reading The City We Became. Some people liked it, some people didn't really connect with it so much. I probably fell in the latter category, I don't know. N.K Jemisin is an author that I've been trying to like as long as she has been publishing because I think she's an amazing writer. She's just one of those authors that I just don't connect to very well. And the Broken Earth trilogy is really the only thing of hers that I have ever, first of all, finished the series, and second of all, really connected to. And it is probably her most acclaimed series as well, but I also just found that I was the most interested in it. I don't feel like I see too many people reading her first two series, although I do see people picking them up. So I'll just mention the Inheritance trilogy was her first series. The first one was The 100,000 Kingdoms. It's kind of an interesting story that seemed like something I should be really into. It's about a young woman whose mother has just been killed. Her grandfather is the ruler of this whole empire, and so she goes as one of the potential heirs to I think kind of like the capital. I don't know, this book came out like a decade ago. I don't remember it well, but it had a lot of elements that I should like, and intrigue, politics, mystery, gods, but I just didn't quite connect with her way of telling the story. I feel like she's an author that takes things that are really epic and makes them really personal, which is really well done. It's just not always, I think, my preference in a story. I always want more detail, more scope, more world building, more epicness. Although I do really like slow character-driven stories, so I don't know. I'm not sure exactly why I didn't love this series, but if you have really liked some of her other books, go back and check out the Inheritance trilogy or the Dreamblood duology. So that's my first attempt at making a list of lesser-known works and series by authors that are popular on Booktube. Let me know what I've missed. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of things that I've missed. This was just what I could think of. I'm sure there are a lot more examples of this. And in general, I'm hoping this will excite you to go and look up some backlist books and just read some lesser works by authors you love, or just try to find books that people don't know about as much and start talking about those. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments if you can think of any other examples of books like this, and I'll see you next time.